There are certain kinds of silence that don't feel peaceful. They feel loaded. Like the air in a room after someone has said something that can't be unsaid. That's what my life became. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just heavy. Quiet in a way that makes you aware of your own breathing. Quiet in a way that reminds you something is missing, even when everything looks the same. People think betrayal is a moment. A discovery. A confrontation. A door slamming. But for me, it was more like waking up in a house that still had all the furniture, all the familiar corners, and realizing none of it belonged to me anymore. Like I had been living inside something that was already gone. I didn't understand that at first. At first, I kept moving like normal. I answered questions. I went through routines. I nodded when people spoke. I even laughed at things that were supposed to be funny. But inside, something had shifted. Trust isn't something you notice when it's there. It's like gravity. It holds everything in place without asking for credit. And then one day it's gone, and suddenly nothing makes sense. You don't even know what direction is down. I remember standing alone in a room that felt unfamiliar, even though I had stood in it 1,000 times before. I remember looking at ordinary objects and feeling almost insulted by how normal they were. A glass on a counter. A folded blanket. A dim light left on. All of it unchanged. And yet I felt like I had walked into the aftermath of something I didn't witness. Like the real disaster had already happened, quietly, while I was still calling it a life. There's a particular kind of humiliation that comes with realizing you were the last person to know. Not just about what happened, but about what was real. You start replaying everything. Every conversation. Every small touch. Every moment you thought meant something. And you wonder how much of it was true, and how much of it was performance. That's the part that stays with you. Not just the act itself, whatever it was. But the ease. The smoothness. How someone can look you in the eyes and still live somewhere else entirely. I used to think I was a good judge of people. I used to think love was something you could feel solidifying over time, like cement. You go through enough together, you build something that can't be shaken. That's what I believed. I believed that if you were patient, if you showed up, if you chose someone over and over again, eventually you reached a place where the ground stopped shifting. Where the hard part was behind you. Where you could finally exhale. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe the exhale is when you stop paying attention. Now, I don't trust the feeling of comfort the way I used to. Comfort can be real. But it can also be cover. It can be the quiet space where things grow unnoticed. I don't say that to sound cynical. I say it because I learned it the way you only learn certain things. By losing something you didn't know you could lose. There was a version of me who thought betrayal was something that happened in other people's stories. Something you watched from a distance and judged. Something you assumed you'd see coming. I didn't see anything coming. That's what makes it so hard to explain. There was no warning siren. No obvious villain. No scene where the music changes. Just a life that looked normal right up until it didn't. Even now, when I think back, I struggle with the timeline in my head. Not because I don't know what happened. But because my brain keeps trying to protect me from how long it might have been happening without me noticing. How many ordinary days were not ordinary at all. How many moments I was smiling inside a reality that wasn't shared. There's a strange grief that comes with that. It's not just losing a person. It's losing your own memory of happiness. Because it becomes contaminated. You look back and wonder, was that real? Or was I alone in it? And the worst part is, you can't ask the past to clarify itself. The past just sits there, unchanged, while your understanding of it rots. I didn't become angry right away. That came later, in flashes. At first, it was numbness. A kind of quiet disbelief. Like my body was walking around, but my mind was stuck somewhere else, trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have a satisfying answer. People talk about closure. They talk about explanations. But betrayal doesn't give you those things. It gives you questions that echo. It gives you the feeling of being foolish for trusting. It gives you the realization that you can be devoted, sincere, present, and still not be enough to stop someone from choosing something else. I started noticing how often I reached for my phone just to not feel alone. How often I sat in silence and listened for sounds that weren't there. How even the safest places began to feel staged. Like sets after the actors have gone home. Sometimes I'd catch myself imagining what it must be like to live with two versions of yourself. One that smiles and makes plans. And another that keeps secrets. I couldn't understand it. And maybe I still don't. Maybe that's the thing you never fully understand. Not because it's too complicated. But because it's too simple. Someone wanted something they didn't tell you about. And they took it. And you were left holding the shape of what you thought you had. I wish I could say the moment changed everything immediately. But the truth is, the change was slower. It seeped in. Like water into cracks. I still woke up in the same world. But it wasn't the same world anymore. Because once you know that trust can be broken without warning, you start realizing how fragile everything was the whole time. And you begin to wonder, quietly, how long it had already been slipping away before you ever noticed. When I think back on the beginning, it's almost embarrassing how certain I was. Not in a naive, fairy tale way. More like, I just felt settled. Like I had finally found the person my life made sense with. We met when neither of us was really looking for anything serious. That's what we told people, anyway. We were both busy, both independent, both the kind of people who didn't talk much about feelings unless we had to. It started casually. Conversations that went longer than they needed to. Small check-ins that didn't feel like obligations. The kind of connection that grows quietly, without announcements. I remember thinking early on that it felt easy to be around her. Not perfect. Not constant excitement. Just easy. She had this way of making ordinary things feel lighter. Like a boring errand turned into something shared. Like sitting in silence wasn't awkward, it was comfortable. Over time, we built routines without even trying. Weeknight dinners. Lazy weekends. Inside jokes that wouldn't make sense to anyone else. The kind of life that doesn't look dramatic from the outside but feels solid when you're inside it. We moved in together after a while, and that was the first real test. Living with someone shows you things you can't hide. The way they handle stress. The way they react when plans change. The little habits that either wear you down or become part of the background. With us, it felt like an adjustment, but not a battle. There were arguments, of course. There always are. Money, time, family expectations. The normal pressure points. But even when we fought, I never doubted the foundation. I never thought, this could fall apart. It was more like, we'll figure it out, because that's what people do when they're committed. That belief became part of me. When we got married, it wasn't some grand whirlwind. It was a decision that felt obvious. Like we were choosing what we already knew. I remember standing there and looking at her and feeling this deep calm. Not adrenaline. Not nerves. Calm. That sounds boring, but it wasn't. It felt like arriving somewhere after a long time on the road. The first couple of years were what you'd expect. Learning how to merge lives completely. Navigating responsibilities. Building a shared rhythm. There were stressful seasons. Times when one of us was overwhelmed and the other had to carry more. Times when we drifted a little without meaning to. But I always thought that was normal. People talk about marriage like it's either constant bliss or constant misery. I learned pretty quickly it's mostly in between. It's paying bills, cleaning up, asking how someone's day was, making coffee, watching the same show every night because you're too tired to choose anything else. And somewhere in that repetition, trust forms. Not as a dramatic vow, but as a quiet assumption. I trusted her the way you trust gravity. It wasn't something I thought about. It was just there. If she said she was meeting a friend, I didn't question it. If she seemed distant for a day, I assumed she was tired. If she was on her phone more than usual, I didn't imagine anything beyond the obvious. That's what trust is, I think. It's not surveillance. It's not constant reassurance. It's the ability to let someone exist without needing proof every hour that they're still yours. And she gave me no reason not to. That's the part that's hard to explain. People want warning signs. They want the story to have a clear flaw from the start. But our relationship didn't feel fragile. It felt like a safe place. She could be affectionate in these small, everyday ways. Touching my arm as she passed by. Sending a quick message just to check in. Remembering little things I mentioned weeks earlier. I did the same. I thought we were doing what couples do when they're building something real. There was a point, maybe halfway through our marriage, when things actually got better. We had gone through one of those stretches where life feels heavy. Work stress, family obligations, just the general exhaustion of being adults. We weren't unhappy, but we were tired. Then somehow, slowly, we came back to each other. More laughter. More effort. More softness. It felt like we had survived something. Like we had earned a deeper kind of closeness. I remember thinking, this is what people mean when they say love matures. It's not about constant passion. It's about choosing each other again and again, even when it's mundane. And she seemed happier. More present. There were moments when she'd look at me in a way that made me feel seen, like she was genuinely grateful we had made it this far. We talked about the future in this casual, assumed way. Trips we might take someday. Changes we might make. The kind of conversations you only have when you believe the person sitting across from you will still be there. It wasn't forced. It wasn't some performance I recognized. It felt real. That's why I didn't guard myself. I didn't keep emotional distance. I didn't hold back pieces of my trust, just in case. Because why would I? We weren't new. We weren't fragile. We were established. We had history. And history, in my mind, meant safety. I think I believe that the longer you've been with someone, the less likely they are to hurt you. Like time itself is proof. Like shared memories are a contract. I know now that's not how it works. But at the time, I lived inside that assumption completely. I was proud of what we had built. Not because it looked perfect, but because it felt steady. Because I thought we had made it past the hardest parts. I didn't realize that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a relationship is not the chaos. It's the calm that makes you stop looking closely. And back then, I wasn't looking closely at all. There was a stretch of time when I genuinely believed we were entering the best phase of our relationship. Not the beginning, when everything is exciting because it's new. Not the early marriage years, when you're still figuring out how to fit together. This felt different. It felt earned. Like we had made it through enough life to finally breathe. I remember noticing it in small ways first. She smiled more. Not the polite kind of smile you give out of habit, but the real one that reaches your eyes. She'd come into a room and lean against me for no reason. Kiss my cheek while I was doing something boring. Laugh at something I said that wasn't even that funny. It was like she had softened again. And I didn't question it. I was relieved by it. Because if I'm being honest, there had been months before that where we felt a little, distant. Nothing dramatic. No huge fights. Just the quiet drift that happens when two people get busy and tired and start living next to each other instead of with each other. So when that distance started to close, it felt like a gift. Like we were finding our way back. She started talking more about us. About doing things together again, not just out of routine, but intentionally. She'd bring up ideas casually, like they had been sitting in her mind for a while. Maybe we should take a trip somewhere soon. We should do more date nights. We used to be good at that. One night, she mentioned something about how fast time was moving. It's crazy, she said. It feels like we blinked and years passed. I nodded, and she looked at me for a long second, then added, I don't want to take this for granted. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it seemed suspicious. Because it felt meaningful. It sounded like someone appreciating what they had. It made me feel chosen. There was more affection, too. Not just physical, but emotional. She asked questions again, the way she used to when we were first together. How I was really doing. What I wanted in the next few years. What I worried about. It felt like she was paying attention. Like she was present. And I responded to it completely. I leaned into that version of us without hesitation. I started thinking, this is it. This is the payoff. This is what people mean when they say relationships go through seasons, and if you hold on, you come out stronger. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were reconnecting. There was a period where she seemed almost excited about the future. She'd bring up plans in this casual but hopeful way. Not in a pressured, we need to fix things way. More like, look at us. We're still here. Let's make it special. I remember one evening we were sitting together, doing nothing important, and she suddenly said, we should do something memorable soon. I asked what she meant, and she shrugged. I don't know. Just, something for us. It was vague, but it made my chest feel warm. Because in my mind, it meant she was invested. She was thinking about us as something worth celebrating. I didn't realize how hungry I was for that reassurance until it showed up. I think that's part of what made it so powerful. When you've been with someone for years, you stop expecting grand gestures. You start measuring love in smaller things. A touch. A look. A moment of effort. And she was giving me those things again. There were even moments when she seemed almost nostalgic. She'd bring up early memories, laughing about how we used to be. Remember when we couldn't go a day without seeing each other? Remember that tiny apartment and how we thought we were so grown up? It felt like she was reconnecting with our story. Like she was reminding herself of why we chose each other. And I thought, this is good. This is healthy. This is what couples do when they're recommitting without saying the word. I remember thinking, we're going to be okay. Better than okay. There was one conversation where she mentioned the idea of doing something symbolic someday. Not immediately, not seriously planned, just a thought. Wouldn't it be nice, she said, to renew our promises at some point? Not because anything's wrong. Just because we've grown. I laughed a little, surprised. You're already thinking that far ahead? She smiled. Why not? I like the idea of choosing each other again. That sentence hit me hard. In a good way. It made me feel like she saw us as permanent. Like she wasn't just here out of habit. Like she wanted this life. I carried that feeling around for days. I would look at her and think, God, I'm lucky. People don't always get this. People lose each other in the noise of life. But we were finding each other again. That's what I believed. And the thing is, nothing about it felt forced. That's what makes it difficult, even now, to separate what was real from what wasn't. Because she wasn't cold. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't acting like someone checked out. She was warm. She was affectionate. She was talking about the future. She was making me feel safe. And I accepted that safety completely. I let myself relax into it. I stopped noticing the small gaps. I stopped paying attention to the moments that didn't quite match. Because when someone is holding your hand and smiling at you like that, the last thing you want to believe is that anything is wrong. I thought we were standing on solid ground again. I didn't realize we were standing on something already cracking beneath us. Once things started feeling good again, I didn't just appreciate it. I depended on it. That's something I can admit now, looking back with more honesty than I had at the time. When you've been with someone for years, their presence becomes more than companionship. It becomes a kind of anchor. A reference point. A place your mind returns to without you even realizing it. And when that anchor feels steady, you stop bracing yourself. You stop preparing for storms. You start living like stability is guaranteed. I didn't think of it as letting my guard down, because I didn't think I had a guard up in the first place. I thought trust was just the natural state of marriage. But the truth is, I was giving more of myself over to the relationship than I understood. Her mood shaped the atmosphere of our home. Her warmth made me feel secure. Her affection felt like proof that everything was fine. And the more she gave me that sense of closeness, the more I leaned into it. I started imagining the future in a way I hadn't in a long time. Not because anything dramatic had changed, but because it finally felt safe to. I'd catch myself thinking about where we might be in 5 years. What kind of life we'd have. What we'd look back on. It wasn't even about specific goals. It was the assumption that she would be there. That we were moving forward together. I remember how natural it felt to say, we, about everything. We should do this someday. We'll figure that out. We're in a good place. It was automatic. And I think that's where the dependency really lived. Not in neediness. In certainty. I started taking comfort in the idea that no matter what happened outside our relationship, inside it was solid. Work could be stressful. Life could be chaotic. People could disappoint you. But this was supposed to be the place that didn't shift. So when she became more affectionate, more present, it felt like the universe was rewarding us. Like we had passed some invisible test. I didn't just feel happy. I felt relieved. And relief is dangerous, in a way. Because relief makes you stop questioning. It makes you stop paying attention to the small instincts that whisper, something's off. I ignored those whispers completely, because I didn't want them. I wanted peace. I wanted to believe in what we had. There were nights when we'd sit together, not doing anything special, and I would feel this quiet gratitude. I'd look at her and think, this is my person. This is the life I chose. And it felt good. It felt like maturity. Like stability. Like I was finally living the kind of relationship people spend years searching for. I started opening up more, too. Sharing thoughts I usually kept to myself. Talking about fears, insecurities, things I didn't always know how to put into words. And she would listen. She would nod, touch my hand, tell me she understood. Sometimes she'd say things like, I'm here. You know that, right? And I believed her. Completely. That belief wasn't intellectual. It was emotional. It was woven into how I moved through the world. I didn't realize how much of my sense of safety was tied to her until later. At the time, it just felt normal. Like love. There was also something about the way she talked about us during that period. She seemed invested in the idea that we were stronger than ever. Like we had reached some new level. She'd make comments about how far we'd come, how proud she was of what we'd built. And every time she said that, it made me relax further. Because who talks like that if they're hiding something? That was my logic. I thought deception looked like distance. I thought betrayal came with coldness. I didn't understand that sometimes betrayal comes wrapped in closeness. Sometimes it's hidden inside affection. I trusted her more because she was trying harder. That's the part that still messes with me. Effort made me feel safe. The more she leaned in, the more I leaned in. It became a feedback loop. And without realizing it, I stopped holding any part of myself back. I didn't keep mental space for doubt. I didn't maintain independence in the way I used to. Not because she demanded it. Because I thought we were past the point where I needed it. Marriage, in my mind, was the place where you could finally exhale. So I exhaled. I let myself be fully inside it. I let myself believe in the version of our life that was being presented to me. There were moments when friends would joke about relationships, about people cheating, about trust issues. And I would feel almost smug, in a quiet way. Not arrogant. Just grateful that I didn't have to worry about that. I thought we were different. I thought we had something steady. I thought we had grown up. I didn't know how fragile that confidence actually was. I didn't know it was built on information I didn't have. I didn't know that while I was sinking deeper into the comfort of us, there was another reality running parallel. And the scariest part is that I didn't sense it. Not really. Because when you feel safe, you stop scanning for danger. You stop imagining that the person beside you could be living a life you're not part of. You stop believing that your trust could be used against you. I wasn't protecting myself. I wasn't preparing for anything. I was just living. And at the time, that felt like love. Now, I realize it was also exposure. Because the more completely you hand someone your trust, the more completely they can break you without you seeing it coming. Looking back, I can find the cracks. Not the kind of cracks that scream at you. The kind you only notice after the whole thing collapses, when you're standing in the rubble and your brain starts doing what it does to survive. Searching. Replaying. Trying to make the ending feel less impossible. At the time, nothing felt urgent. That's what's strange. There wasn't a sudden shift where I thought, something is wrong. It was more like, small moments that didn't quite land, and then passed. Tiny fractures in an otherwise normal surface. I remember there were days when she seemed distracted in a way I couldn't name. Not distant exactly. She was still affectionate, still present. But her attention would flicker. Like part of her mind was somewhere else. I'd be talking about something simple, and she'd nod, smile, respond, but there was a slight delay. Like she was catching up. I assumed stress. I assumed fatigue. Everyone has things on their mind. There were also little changes in her routines. Nothing dramatic. Just adjustments. She started going out more often for quick errands that didn't always make sense. Staying a little later after work. Taking calls in another room. If I noticed, I didn't press. I didn't want to be the kind of person who interrogates their spouse over normal life. I trusted her. So I filled in the gaps with reasonable explanations. That's what trust does. It makes you generous with your assumptions. Sometimes she'd come home and seem almost overly cheerful. Like she was trying to bring energy into the room. And I would feel grateful for it. I didn't think, why are you acting like that? I thought, she's making an effort. She cares. But there were moments, quiet ones, where something felt slightly misaligned. Like the warmth was real, but also, slightly rehearsed. That's hard to explain without sounding paranoid. At the time, I didn't have the language for it. It was just a faint feeling that would appear and disappear before I could hold on to it. There were also changes with her phone. Again, nothing obvious. She didn't suddenly lock it down or hide it aggressively. But I noticed she kept it closer. Face down more often. If a notification popped up, she'd glance quickly, then move on. If I walked into the room while she was scrolling, she'd sometimes tilt the screen without thinking. Small, unconscious movements. I didn't interpret them as secrecy. I interpreted them as privacy. We all have private conversations. Friends, family, work. I told myself it was normal. And maybe it was. Maybe some of it was nothing. That's the thing about hindsight. It turns every detail into a potential clue. But at the time, these were just tiny points of friction in an otherwise smooth life. There were nights when she seemed restless. Not unhappy. Just unsettled. She'd get up and pace a little. Or she'd sit quietly longer than usual. If I asked what was wrong, she'd shake her head. Nothing. Just tired. And I believed her. Because why wouldn't I? Sometimes she'd be more affectionate after those moments. Like she was compensating for something. I thought it was sweet. I thought it meant she didn't want distance between us. I didn't think it could mean anything else. There was also a shift in the way she talked about the future. Not less. If anything, she talked about it more. Plans, ideas, little comments about how much she loved our life. It should have reassured me. And it did. But there was something about it that felt urgent. Like she was trying to solidify something. Like she needed to keep reminding both of us that we were okay. Again, I didn't label it that way then. I only feel it now, when I replay those conversations with new knowledge. There were moments where she'd say something like, "We're good, aren't we?" And I'd laugh and answer, "Of course." It felt like a normal question. Now it feels like something else. I also noticed she seemed more emotionally sensitive. Small things would irritate her more than usual. A harmless comment could make her quiet. A minor inconvenience could make her tense. And then she'd apologize quickly, almost too quickly. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm like this." I'd tell her it was fine. That everyone gets overwhelmed. I didn't push. I didn't want to make her feel judged. I thought I was being supportive. I thought I was being a good partner. But support can also become blindness. When you love someone, you don't want to imagine the worst. You want to protect the story you're living inside. So you smooth over inconsistencies. You ignore the moments that don't fit. You tell yourself that closeness means honesty. And she was still close. She was still laughing with me. Still touching me. Still talking about us. So any unease I felt, I buried. I didn't even call it unease. It was just background noise. Life has background noise. Marriage has background noise. That's what I told myself. There was one night, I remember, when she got a message and smiled at her phone. It was quick. Barely anything. But something in me noticed. Not suspicion. Just noticing. I asked, casually, "Who's that?" She looked up, still smiling. "Just someone from work." And that was it. No hesitation. No awkwardness. Just a simple answer. So I dropped it immediately. Because that's what you do when you trust someone. You don't interrogate. You don't linger. You move on. But the feeling didn't completely leave. It sat somewhere deep, unnamed. Like a hairline crack you can't see unless the light hits it just right. And I kept living. Kept believing. Kept letting the calm convince me that everything was fine. I didn't realize that the unease wasn't paranoia. It was my mind brushing against something it wasn't ready to understand. And the surface still looked whole. Right up until the moment it didn't. The night everything broke didn't feel important while it was happening. That's what I keep coming back to. If you asked me to describe the day leading up to it, I wouldn't have anything dramatic to offer. It wasn't an anniversary. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't a fight. It was just a day. Work, errands, dinner, the usual small conversations that fill up a life. I remember her being in a good mood. Not overly cheerful, not distant. Just normal. We talked about something trivial while we ate. She mentioned a couple of things she wanted to do over the next few weeks. I nodded, half listening, thinking about my own list of responsibilities. At one point, she smiled at me across the table. It was casual. Comfortable. Like nothing in the world was wrong. After dinner, we cleaned up together without thinking. She rinsed dishes, I dried them. We moved around each other in that familiar way you do when you've shared space for years. There was no tension. No sense of approaching disaster. Later, she said she was going to take a shower. I remember sitting down on the edge of the bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, not really paying attention to anything. The house was quiet except for the sound of water running in the other room. It was peaceful. That's what makes it so unsettling now. Because peace was the last thing I felt before everything changed. Her phone was on the nightstand. She'd left it there, like she always did. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't tucked away. It was just sitting out in the open, screen dark. I didn't think about it. I wasn't watching it. I wasn't waiting for anything. Then it lit up. A notification. Just a quick glow in the dim room. Normally, I wouldn't have even looked. But it was right there, in my line of sight. And the message preview was visible. I saw a few words. Not enough to understand at first. My brain didn't register it as real. It felt like reading something in a dream, where the words don't quite connect. Something about missing someone. Something about last night. For a second, I actually thought it was a wrong number. Spam. A joke. Anything but what it was. Because my mind didn't have a category for the other possibility. Then another message came through almost immediately. Shorter. More urgent. And I felt something shift in my body before I even fully understood why. A coldness in my hands. A tightening in my chest. The words weren't dramatic. That's the thing. They weren't written like a movie. They were casual. Familiar. Like two people who had already crossed a line and were talking from the other side of it. Be careful. Not yet. Those small phrases did more damage than anything explicit could have, because they implied a whole hidden world behind them. I stared at the screen. I remember blinking hard, like that would change what I was seeing. The shower was still running. Everything around me was still normal. But the room felt suddenly unfamiliar, like the air had changed. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion. A deep, almost childlike confusion. I thought, this doesn't make sense. This can't be for her. But the phone was hers. The name at the top of the notification wasn't one I recognized. My heart started beating harder. Not in panic yet. More like my body was trying to wake me up. I didn't want to do what I did next. That's important. I didn't pick up her phone with the intention of catching her. I picked it up because my brain needed it to be something else. I needed context. I needed an explanation that would make the words harmless. My fingers moved almost automatically. I knew the passcode. Of course I did. We weren't secretive with each other. Or at least, I thought we weren't. The screen opened. And for a moment, I just stared at the conversation thread. The most recent messages were right there. The kind of familiarity that made my stomach drop. Not flirtation in the early stages. Not awkward introductions. This was, ongoing. Comfortable. Intimate. Like something that had been happening for a while. I scrolled up. Slowly at first. Then faster. My thumb moved, but my mind felt separate, like I was watching someone else do it. The further back I went, the worse it got. Not because there was a single shocking line. Because there were so many. Plans. Private jokes. Little moments of affection that belonged to someone else. The kind of language people use when they've already created a space together. I kept scrolling, hoping to reach the beginning quickly, hoping it would stop, hoping I would find a point where it was clearly a misunderstanding. But it didn't stop. It just kept going. Weeks. Maybe longer. My throat went dry. I could hear the water in the bathroom. I could hear my own breathing. Everything else felt distant. Then I saw something that made it even more surreal. A message she had sent me earlier that same day. Something sweet. Something ordinary. A small heart at the end. The contrast was almost unbearable. It wasn't just that there was another conversation. It was that both conversations existed side by side. Like parallel lives. She had been texting me about our plans, our home, our future. And then texting someone else with a completely different kind of intimacy. The room started to feel too small. I set the phone down, then picked it up again, like I couldn't decide what reality I was supposed to be in. My hands were shaking slightly. Not violently. Just enough to remind me that my body knew something my mind was still resisting. I heard the shower turn off. A simple sound. A normal sound. But it felt like a countdown. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't prepared for confrontation. I wasn't prepared for anything. I just sat there, holding the weight of what I'd seen, trying to understand how quickly a life can split open. The bathroom door opened. Steam drifted into the hallway. She walked out, towel around her hair, face relaxed. She looked peaceful. Like someone finishing an ordinary routine. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey," she said, casually. "Everything okay?" And I just stared at her. Because in that moment, the betrayal wasn't only the messages. It was the ease. The normal expression on her face. The way she could step into the room like nothing had happened. Like we were still inside the same reality. I don't remember what my face looked like. I don't remember if I said anything right away. I only remember the feeling of standing on a trapdoor that had already opened beneath me. And realizing I had no idea how far the fall was going to be. I think people assume that when you discover something like that, you immediately become furious. That you explode. That you start shouting, demanding answers, breaking things. But that wasn't what happened to me. What happened first was disbelief. A kind of stunned refusal. Because my mind couldn't make the information fit into the person standing in front of me. She was still there. Hair damp, face clean, looking at me with mild concern, like I was the one acting strangely. And I was acting strangely. I was holding a reality she didn't know I was holding yet. Or maybe she did. Maybe she saw it in my eyes before I said anything. I don't know. I just remember how quiet everything felt. Like the world was waiting. I picked up the phone again, not dramatically, just carefully, like it was something fragile. My voice came out flatter than I expected. "Who is this?" She blinked. "What?" I held the screen out a little, enough for her to see. Her eyes flicked down. And for the smallest moment, something changed in her face. It wasn't a full reaction. It was subtle. A tightening. A pause. But it was there. And that pause told me more than any confession could have. She swallowed. It's nothing. Nothing. That word landed like an insult. Because nothing doesn't make your hands shake. Nothing doesn't make your chest feel like it's caving in. Nothing doesn't exist in months of messages. I stared at her. My mind was still trying to find an exit. Some explanation that would allow the world to go back. But she wasn't offering one. She was standing there, wrapped in a towel, looking suddenly smaller, not because she was innocent, but because she was caught. I scrolled again, right in front of her. I didn't want to. I didn't want to see more. But I needed to know I wasn't hallucinating. I needed the truth to be undeniable, because part of me was still trying to protect her. Protect us. The messages were right there. The casual intimacy. The familiarity. The evidence of a relationship that existed outside of me. I felt my stomach turn. How long? I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I don't know. That answer made something in me go cold. You don't not know. Not when it's this. Not when it's layered, ongoing, lived in. I looked up at her. My voice sounded distant even to me. Are you seeing someone? Her eyes filled quickly, like she could summon emotion on command. It's not what you think. That phrase. It's almost universal. As if betrayal comes with a script. I let out a sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in it. What else would it be? She stepped forward slightly, reaching out, then stopping. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, but no tears came. Everything was too numb for tears. I kept looking at the thread. At the words that didn't belong to me. At the way someone else had been spoken to with softness. At the way she had been living a version of herself I wasn't part of. And the most surreal part was how normal she still looked. How familiar. How she could stand there in our room, in our life, while that other life existed in her pocket. I whispered, mostly to myself, you were talking about our future. She flinched at that. I know. You were being, I couldn't find the word. You were being affectionate. You were planning things with me. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I was trying. Trying. As if the affair was a detour. As if our marriage was the main road and this was just a mistake on the side. But the messages didn't feel like a mistake. They felt like a parallel existence. I scrolled up further, my hands trembling more now. Photos appeared. Not explicit, but intimate enough. Snapshots of closeness. Moments that weren't supposed to exist. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I dropped the phone onto the bed like it burned. I stood up, pacing a step, then stopping, like my body didn't know what shape to take. This is real, I said, more as a statement than a question. She sobbed quietly. I'm sorry. I stared at her. Sorry was too small. Sorry was what you say when you forget something at the store. Sorry didn't cover months of deception. Sorry didn't explain how she could kiss me goodbye and then send messages like that. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger. Something deeper. A rupture. Like the version of her I had trusted was tearing away, and underneath was someone I didn't recognize. The betrayal wasn't just physical. That would have been painful enough. But what shattered me was the double life. The ease with which she had kept both worlds separate. The way she could be warm with me while being intimate with someone else. The way she could talk about loyalty while actively breaking it. It made me question everything. Every smile. Every touch. Every moment I thought was genuine. I asked, quietly, did you ever feel guilty? She covered her face with her hands. Yes. But even that answer didn't help. Because guilt hadn't stopped her. Guilt hadn't made her tell me. Guilt hadn't made her choose honesty. So what did it mean? I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. The room felt like it was spinning slowly, not physically, but emotionally. Like my mind was trying to orient itself in a new reality. She stood a few feet away, crying, wrapped in the towel-like armor. "I didn't want to lose you," she said. That sentence hit me in a way I can't fully describe. Because it was so selfish. She didn't want to lose me. But she was willing to risk everything. She was willing to fracture me. She was willing to live a lie as long as she could keep both. I looked up at her, voice raw. "You already did." Silence hung between us. The shower steam had faded. The house was still. And in that stillness, I realized something that made my chest ache. This wasn't a single betrayal. It was a whole history I hadn't known I was part of. I wasn't just discovering an affair. I was discovering that my understanding of my own life had been incomplete. That while I thought we were building something, something else had been happening in the shadows. And the proof wasn't something she could talk her way out of. It was there. Written. Saved. Lived. I sat there, staring at the floor, feeling like the ground under me had finally given way. Because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And nothing ever feels fully real again. After the first wave of shock, I expected something clearer to happen. A confession. An explanation. Some moment where the truth settled into a shape I could understand. But that isn't what confrontation feels like when it's real. It isn't clean. It isn't satisfying. It's messy, incomplete, full of half-sentences and silence. We were standing in the same room, but it felt like we were in two different worlds. She kept crying. I kept staring. And neither of us seemed to know how to speak in a way that matched what had just been exposed. I remember asking questions, but they came out slowly, like my mouth was struggling to form them. "Who is he?" She shook her head, wiping her face. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." She looked at me then, eyes red, voice thin. "I don't want to talk about him." That was the first moment I felt something other than heartbreak. Something sharper. Because even now, even caught, she was still controlling the information. She was still deciding what parts of the truth I was allowed to have. I held up the phone again. "This isn't nothing. This isn't," I stopped, because the words wouldn't come. "This is months." She flinched. "I know." "Then say it." She hesitated, like saying it out loud would make it more real. I crossed a line. Crossed a line. Not, I betrayed you. Not, I lied. Just crossed a line, like it was an accident with a marker, not a choice with consequences. I felt my jaw tighten. That's not what this is. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, still wrapped in that towel, shoulders shaking. "I didn't plan it," she said. "It just happened." I stared at her. Nothing just happens, for months. Nothing just happens, with plans and messages and secrecy. But she kept reaching for language that softened it. Like she needed it to be smaller so she could survive it. And maybe she did. Maybe that was her way of coping. But it left me holding something enormous with no help. I sat across from her, a few feet away, like distance could protect me. "How could you look at me," I asked quietly, "and talk about our future?" She covered her face again. "I was trying to fix things." That answer made my stomach turn. Fix things. As if our relationship was broken because of some mutual failure, and this was her twisted way of repairing it. I shook my head slowly. "You were doing this while you were being affectionate with me." "I know," she whispered. The room filled with the sound of her crying and nothing else. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand every detail. But mostly, I wanted to wake up. I wanted it to be a misunderstanding so badly that my mind kept offering me exits. Maybe it wasn't physical. Maybe it was emotional. Maybe it was brief. Maybe. But the evidence didn't allow for maybes. It was all there. And still, she wouldn't give me anything complete. Every time I asked something direct, she answered with fog. I don't know. I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. Mistake. That word kept coming up. Like betrayal is a typo. Like months of deception is a slip. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands gripping together so tightly my fingers hurt. Did you ever think about telling me? She went quiet for a long time. Then, softly, I wanted to. That wasn't an answer. Wanting isn't doing. I felt exhaustion seep into me, heavy and sudden. Because I realized I wasn't going to get the kind of closure people imagine. There wasn't going to be a neat explanation that made it make sense. There was just this: she had done it, and now she was sorry, and the truth was scattered across 1,000 evasions. I looked at her and saw someone I loved, and also someone I didn't understand at all. That was the worst part. The split. Two versions of the same person. The one who laughed with me at dinner. The one who sent messages like that to someone else. How do you hold both in your mind? How do you reconcile them? I asked, almost pleading without meaning to. Was any of it real? She looked up sharply. Of course it was. But her certainty felt fragile. Because if it was real, then what was the other life? And if the other life was real, then what was ours? She reached toward me then, hand trembling. I love you. I pulled back instinctively. Not out of cruelty. Out of reflex. Because the words didn't land the way they used to. They felt unstable. Like language that had been used too easily. Her face crumpled. Please, she whispered. I don't want this to end. That sentence hung in the air. Not, I don't want to hurt you. Not, I want to make it right. Just. I don't want this to end. As if the worst part was losing the life she had, not destroying the one I thought we shared. I stood up again, pacing. My thoughts were jagged, incomplete. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I could do. All I knew was that something fundamental had shifted, and no amount of crying could shift it back. I looked at her one more time, and she looked like someone waiting for me to decide her fate. And that realization made me feel sick. Because I wasn't supposed to be the one holding the consequences alone. She had already made choices. Now I was just living in them. The conversation kept circling, never landing anywhere solid. Questions without answers. Apologies without clarity. Two people in the same room, staring at two different versions of the same life. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet thought began to form. Not anger. Not even grief yet. Just a cold awareness. That whatever we were now, it wasn't the marriage I thought I had. The days after felt unreal. Not in the dramatic way people describe heartbreak, with sobbing on the floor and constant screaming. It was quieter than that. It was waking up and forgetting for half a second. And then remembering. It was moving through the house like it belonged to someone else. It was silence where there used to be routine. We didn't have some immediate resolution. There was no clear decision made that night. I think we both just stopped. She stayed in the house, but it didn't feel like we were together. We existed in separate corners of the same space, like strangers forced into proximity. She would speak sometimes, softly, like any louder sound might shatter what was left. I'm sorry. Can we talk? Please. And I would nod or shake my head or say nothing at all, because my brain was full of static. I couldn't find language big enough. Everything felt too small. The bed became unbearable. Sleeping next to her felt impossible, but sleeping alone felt like admitting something final. So I spent nights on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Every creak sounded louder. Every silence felt heavier. I kept thinking about how normal everything still looked. The same mugs in the kitchen. The same shoes by the door. The same mundane life. But now it all felt contaminated. Like the ordinary had been touched by something poisonous. I couldn't stop replaying the messages in my head. Not even the explicit parts. The casual parts. The familiarity. The way it wasn't some wild, chaotic mistake. It was integrated into her life. Into our life. That was what haunted me. I found myself obsessing over details I didn't even want. What did she tell him about me? Did he know I existed? Did he laugh about it? Did she? My mind kept circling like it was trying to find a piece of information that would make it hurt less. But every question only opened another one. She tried to explain more over the next few days, but it was always fragmented. She would start a sentence and then stop. It wasn't about you. I was feeling lost. I don't know what I was thinking. None of it landed. Not because I needed her to suffer. Because none of it answered the real question. How could you live two lives? How could you look at me with warmth while doing something that would destroy me? That question sat between us like a wall. Friends and coworkers still expected normalcy. That was another kind of cruelty. The world didn't pause. People asked how I was. I said, fine. People talked about weekend plans. I nodded. I went to work and answered emails and sat in meetings while my insides felt hollow. There's a particular loneliness in carrying something like that while the rest of life continues. You start to feel like you're watching everyone through glass. Like you're not fully part of the same reality anymore. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not because I was protecting her. Because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't seen it. Ashamed that my marriage, the thing I thought was solid, had this hidden rot. Ashamed that I didn't know what to do next. People think betrayal makes you angry immediately. Sometimes it just makes you small. I started questioning myself in ways I didn't expect. Was I blind? Was I naive? Was I not enough? Even though I knew, logically, that her choices were hers. Emotion doesn't follow logic. Emotion looks for blame like it's oxygen. And sometimes it turns inward. There were moments when she would cry and say, I'll do anything. But even that felt strange. Because anything now was after. After the deception. After the proof. After my trust had already been turned into something breakable. I would look at her and feel this confusing mix of things. Love, still, in some stubborn corner. Anger. Disgust. Grief. And something else. A kind of distance that frightened me more than rage. Because rage means you still care. Distance feels like the beginning of the end. One night, I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom and realized I didn't know where I belonged. The house was ours, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. My life was still technically intact, but it felt like someone had removed the center of it. I thought about leaving. Then thought about staying. Both options felt unbearable. Leaving meant accepting it was over. Staying meant accepting, what? A life where I would always wonder. A life where trust would become work? I didn't know if I could live like that. I started noticing how betrayal changes your body. I couldn't eat much. Food tasted like cardboard. My chest felt tight randomly during the day. Sleep came in shallow bursts. I would wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing, like my body was still trying to process danger. Sometimes I'd hear her moving in another room and feel a surge of sadness so sharp it made me nauseous. Not because I missed her. Because I missed what I thought we were. That version of my life was gone. And I couldn't bring it back by wanting it. The worst part was the delayed realization that this wasn't just about what she did. It was about what it did to my sense of reality. I started questioning everything. Not just her. Everything. If someone you trust completely can live beside you while hiding something this big, what else do people hide? What else do we never see? The world felt less stable. People felt less knowable. Even my own memories felt uncertain, like they had been edited without my consent. And in the middle of all of it, she was still there, moving through the house softly, like she was afraid of making noise. Like quiet could undo it. But quiet doesn't undo betrayal. Quiet just makes it echo louder. And I could feel, even then, that something irreversible had begun. Not a dramatic ending. A slow collapse. The kind that happens behind closed doors, where no one else can see it. Until there's nothing left standing. It took longer than I expected to understand what had actually happened. Not the facts. The facts were clear enough. The messages existed. The deception existed. The proof didn't disappear just because I wanted it to. But understanding is different from knowing. Knowing is information. Understanding is what settles into you after the shock fades, when you're left alone with the shape of what it did to you. At first, I thought the worst part was the obvious part. That she had been with someone else. That she had crossed a line that marriage is supposed to make unthinkable. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized the deepest wound wasn't physical. It was structural. It was what it did to my sense of reality. Betrayal, I learned, isn't only about what someone does. It's about what they allow you to believe while they're doing it. It's about the life you're living with full sincerity. And the life they're living beside it. I kept coming back to the normal moments. The dinners. The laughter. The plans. The way she could talk about the future with warmth in her voice. Those were the moments that haunted me more than anything explicit. Because they meant she was capable of separation. She could hold my hand with one version of herself and disappear with another. And I couldn't understand that. I still can't, completely. People talk about cheating like it's desire, or temptation, or weakness. Maybe sometimes it is. But what I experienced felt less like a moment of weakness and more like an ongoing choice to let me live in ignorance. That's what made it feel like theft. Not just of fidelity. Of agency. Because if you don't know the truth, you can't choose. You can't consent to the life you're in. You can't protect yourself. You're just being managed. That realization came slowly, and it was brutal. I would sit alone and think, I wasn't part of the same relationship she was part of. I was in a version of it. A curated one. A safe one, for her. And that's where the moral weight started to settle. Because the betrayal wasn't only that she wanted something else. It was that she wanted something else without giving up what she already had. She wanted two lives. And I was the one left carrying the consequences of that imbalance. I kept asking myself questions I couldn't answer. Was she ever going to tell me? If I hadn't seen it, how long would it have continued? Would she have gone on planning our future while living another one indefinitely? Or would she have ended it quietly and never spoken of it, letting me believe we had simply grown stronger? That thought made my stomach turn. Because it meant my reality was fragile in a way I hadn't understood before. Trust, I realized, is not just about believing someone won't hurt you. It's about believing they won't let you unknowingly live inside a lie. And once that belief breaks, it doesn't come back easily. Even if forgiveness is possible, innocence isn't. There were moments when she tried to show remorse. She cried. She apologized. She said she didn't know why she did it. She said she felt lost. Maybe some of that was true. Maybe people do things they don't fully understand. But remorse doesn't erase the fact that she was able to do it at all. And that was what changed my view of her. Not into a villain. Not into a monster. Just into someone capable of a kind of compartmentalized betrayal I didn't think existed in our life. I think that's why it's so morally complicated. Because she wasn't cruel in the way people imagine cruelty. She wasn't cold every day. She wasn't outwardly abusive. She was warm. She was familiar. She was loving, sometimes. And that made it harder, not easier. Because how do you reconcile warmth with deception? How do you measure love when someone can say all the right things while doing something that destroys you? It forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. People are not always one thing. Someone can care about you and still hurt you deeply. Someone can want a life with you and still betray it. Someone can cry and still have chosen what they chose. That ambiguity is what stays. Not a clean lesson. Not a simple moral. Just a question mark where certainty used to be. In the aftermath, I started noticing how often we treat betrayal as entertainment. A scandal. A story. Something that happens to other people. But living it is quieter. It's sitting in a room and realizing your life was being edited without your knowledge. It's realizing that trust isn't just broken in the present. It breaks backward. It reaches into your memories and poisons them. And it breaks forward, too. Because even if you move on, even if you heal, you carry a new awareness. That people can hide. That normalcy can be performance. That love is not always protection. I don't know what the right answer is in situations like this. I don't know if betrayal is always unforgivable. I don't know if people can truly rebuild after something like that. I only know what it feels like to be on the receiving end. To realize too late that while you were building something with full sincerity, someone else was building something parallel in secret. And I think that's the question I'm left with, more than anything. Is betrayal defined by the act itself? Or by the life someone lets you believe in while they're quietly taking it away?